The morning of March 1st, 1954 was like most other late winter mornings in the quiet New Mexico town of Los Alamos. The unincorporated hamlet had been reclusive for more than a decade. Dirt roads were slow to pavement and outsiders were strictly forbidden from entrance, not because residents were territorial, but because the Secret City, as it came to be known, was home to the most brilliant minds in the world working on the most destructive forces known to man. 5,000 miles away, conditions were much worse. The surface temperature near the Marshall Islands of the South Pacific reached 180 million degrees Fahrenheit, nearly 6 times hotter than the sun's core. And while that hellish temperature lasted just minutes, it would devastate the surrounding areas of the islands for weeks, months, and years. The United States government would declare their latest nuclear test a success, but as media reports in New Mexico and around the world would soon illustrate, what happened on March 1st, 1954 was a catastrophic miscalculation that would have long-term reverberations in the Cold War race for nuclear supremacy. The atomic age began on July 16, 1945, more than 200 miles south of Los Alamos, in the barren stretch of the White Sands Missile Range known as Jornada del Muerto, or Journey of Death. There, the world's first atomic bomb detonated with the power of nearly 19,000 pounds of TNT. Less than a month later, 2 similar devices were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. The devastating blows left hundreds of thousands of Japanese dead and forced the nation to surrender to Allied forces, bringing a swift end to World War II. 6 years later, the U.S. shifted its focus to a new kind of bomb, one that was known by many inside Los Alamos as the Super. The new bomb was developed by physicists Stan Ulam and Edward Teller. While the men didn't always see eye to eye, they shared a similar fear of growing Soviet threat and believed America needed to develop and successfully test this new thermonuclear device. According to physicist Kenneth Ford, the new thermonuclear weapon utilized a 2-stage explosion. The first was a fission explosion, like that used in the Trinity test. During a fission explosion, massive amounts of X-rays are released. By channeling that energy into compression of a thermonuclear fuel, they could harness the much more powerful reaction of fusion, which would put the yield of this new superbomb in the megaton range, or millions of tons of TNT. The U.S. successfully tested a thermonuclear device in 1952 during Operation Ivy. Codenamed Mike, this weapon detonated with a yield of 10.4 megatons, or according to Ford, 7 Hiroshimas. While the test was successful, the bomb itself weighed in at a whopping 82 tons, which would be impossible to drop on an enemy from boat or plane. Enter Operation Castle.
Operation Castle.
The series of 6 thermonuclear tests were conducted by the Atomic Energy Commission between March 1st and May 14th of 1954. Bravo was the first of the tests, and as it turned out, the most powerful, although it wasn't supposed to be. Ten days into testing, the Las Cruces Sun-News reported that the U.S. would soon test a device that would deliver, quote, history's greatest man-made blast, signaling to everyone, especially the Soviets, that the U.S. had just made a substantial leap in nuclear proliferation. It's important to understand the role the media played in the psychology of the Cold War. Mass communication was no stranger to swaying public opinion on global conflicts. The war of images and words brewing during the Cold War focused on the growing nuclear might of the US and Soviet Union. But what good would deterrence be if the enemy didn't know about the destructive technology? So in 1952, 3 atomic bomb tests were conducted in Nevada and televised on the big 3 networks, CBS, ABC, and NBC. The goal was to show American audiences, and any Soviet operative that may be watching, the growing power of America's nuclear arsenal. However, it proved to be a disaster, with the images being mostly blown out due to the ultra-bright light of an atomic detonation. The propaganda machine was ready to go. The technology was not.
Beautiful white cloud and a clear blue sky, dirty gray bottom, the proving ground.
Technology and a grave misunderstanding of its calculus would prove fallible again with Castle Bravo. According to official reports and testimony from Ford, Bravo was supposed to be just 5 megatons. However, a critical miscalculation by scientists at Los Alamos led to what would amount to 2 fission explosions on top of a thermonuclear blast. On March 17th, the Albuquerque Tribune confirmed that the U.S. indeed now possessed a deliverable hydrogen bomb. New York Representative Sterling Cole, who served as the chair of the House Senate Atomic Energy Committee, said the U.S. had, quote, perfected the superbomb in a deliverable form. And while officials sang the praises of the tests in the papers, other reports began emerging that something had gone horribly wrong at Bikini Atoll. Instead of a 5 megaton blast, the misunderstanding of lithium-6 and lithium-7 isotopes mixed with the thermonuclear fuel of lithium deuteride produced a 15 megaton blast. Just 3 seconds after detonation, the diameter of Bravo's mushroom cloud was 4 miles. After a minute, the cloud rose to more than 35,000 feet, higher than the cruising altitude of most modern planes. 10 minutes after the blast, the damage zone grew to roughly 62 miles. The blinding fireball could be seen 250 miles away. Media outlets scrambled to deal with this new reality in numerous ways. Many shared the sometimes cryptic rhetoric of lawmakers. Some used humor, like these page 6 passages that highlighted the futility of trying to protect oneself from a nuclear blast. Humor, however, gave way to the disturbing reports of Bravo's aftermath. Readers of the Albuquerque Journal learned on March 20th that an entire island had been wiped off the planet from the Bravo and other Castle tests, saying, quote, before the blast, there was an island in the Pacific. After the explosion, it was gone. Other disturbing reports began emerging about a fishing boat and its crew of 23 men having been irradiated in the Bravo explosion. As a sidebar to a journal story on March 18th, New Mexicans were learning about the latest victims of nuclear weapons. The Lucky Dragon No. 5 was a fishing boat that weighed in at just under 100 tons. Built in 1947, it served as a lifeline for desperate fishermen looking to provide for their families after Japan's economy collapsed. On board the ship was Oishi Matashichi, a young man who was like many others in Japan. The country's failing economy forced him to quit school in the 8th grade and turn to fishing to support his family. He would share the harrowing details of the Lucky Dragon's brush with the bomb in his autobiography, The Day the Sun Rose in the West. According to Matashichi, just after 1 a.m. on March 1st, the crew was awoken by a blinding flash of light through the portholes of the hull. Moments later, the deafening sonic boom hit, thrashing the ship, its crew, and its catch around like a toy in a river. Hours after the blast, Matashichi described a white ash that began raining down on the crew. This death ash would ultimately be the crew's undoing and claim the life of one of its crew members. In a perfect example of the dual narratives the media was sharing, the Journal published a story on March 18th touting America's nuclear might, next to a photo of one of the Lucky Dragon's severely burned crew members. The crew had been sent to Tokyo University Hospital, where they all would be admitted by the end of March. Some had mild symptoms. Some, like radio operator Akichi Kuboyama, would see their symptoms worsen over days, weeks, and months. Another disturbing trend began appearing in news publications: nationalism with racial undertones. Newspapers like the Albuquerque Journal, the Santa Fe New Mexican, and the Carlsbad Current-Argus ran headlines like, "Japs burned in H-bomb blast may suffer effects for years." Another headline read, "Some exposed Jap fishermen may die." Despite Bravo's power, America wasn't done testing. Reports from the Albuquerque Tribune on March 26th said the U.S. government still planned on more testing. Some articles tried to downplay what was happening, saying, quote, "There has been no evidence that anyone was injured or killed by the explosion, which got out of hand." Which was patently false, according to reports about the deteriorating condition of Akichi Kuboyama. By August of 1954, his condition was headed downhill fast. He had developed meningitis from the radiation poisoning, and he was suffering crippling pain, which caused violent behavior, so violent that his bed was moved to the floor to prevent him from falling out of it. He then lapsed into a coma until September 4th. Then finally, on the 23rd, surrounded by family and friends, Kuboyama became the first fatality caused by Operation Castle. The series of tests were as much a failure as they were a success. As 1954 wore on, more and more reports became critical of the nuclear testing. The Santa Fe New Mexican called Bravo a, quote, runaway test that prickled the world's scalps. A Yale Geiger counter was completely knocked offline in the massive wake of radioactivity from Bravo. Teller's bomb was being called a flop, but it didn't stop the world's superpowers from racing toward total annihilation.
Ноль! Взрыв сопровождался световой вспышкой необычной силы.
Less than a decade later, the Soviets would dwarf the yield of Bravo with its Tsar bomb. On October 30th, 1961, their test unleashed 50 megatons, making it the largest explosion in human history. 2 years later, President John F. Kennedy signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which prohibited atmospheric testing globally. Humanity didn't stop the march toward nuclear war, they just moved it underground. A month before the Soviet Tsar bomb test, President Kennedy addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations, offering up a terrifying warning.
Today, every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable. Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.